The contract felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a stack of papers should feel. I looked at the landlord, a man named Mr. Thorne, whose skin looked like yellowed parchment stretched too tight over a skull. He didn't blink. He just waited, his fountain pen hovering like a needle. "The rent is unusually low for a place like the Obsidian Heights," I said, my voice echoing in the marble lobby. I was a freelance illustrator, and my bank account was a desert. This place was an oasis I couldn't afford to ignore. "We value the right tenant over the right price, Mr. Vance," Thorne replied. His voice was like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "The building has a personality. It requires someone quiet, someone observant." I signed. I didn't just sign for a room. I signed for a new life. I was moving into Unit 904. As I took the brass key, I felt a faint vibration through the metal. I brushed it off as the subway lines running deep beneath the city. The move-in was seamless. The elevator was lined with dark wood and smelled of expensive cigars and old copper. But as I reached the 9th floor, the air changed. It was heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. My apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, oak floors, and walls painted a deep, matte gray. The first night was silent, too silent. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the city sounds to bleed through. But the insulation was perfect. I couldn't hear the sirens or the rain. I fell asleep thinking I had finally found peace. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. The sound wasn't a noise. It was a feeling. A low-frequency thrum that started in the soles of my feet and traveled up my spine. Then the first scream broke. It wasn't high-pitched. It was a guttural, wet sound, like someone trying to shout with a throat full of gravel. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds. I sat up, heart hammering. "Hello," I called out. Silence. Then, from the wall behind my headboard, a soft, rhythmic sobbing started. It sounded like a woman, but the timbre was wrong. It sounded like the wood itself was weeping. I pressed my ear to the drywall. I could hear a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I cornered the janitor, a hunched man named Arthur. "Did you hear that last night?" "In 904. Arthur stopped mopping. He didn't look at me. "The building settles, Mr. Vance. It's an old soul. It has a lot of weight to carry." "That wasn't settling," I hissed. "That was a person." "There are no people in the walls," Arthur whispered, finally meeting my eyes. His pupils were tiny pinpricks of fear. Just the memories of what it took to build this place. I spent the day researching the history of the Obsidian Heights. It was built in the 1920s by an eccentric architect named Malachi Stone. Stone was obsessed with living architecture. He believed that for a building to truly stand the test of time, it needed a biological foundation. He disappeared before the building was finished, and the construction was completed by a firm that went bankrupt shortly after. That evening, I tried to leave. I grabbed my keys and went to the door. It wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was retracted, the handle turned, but the door felt like it had been welded to the frame. I pulled until my muscles screamed. Then the sun set. The gray walls of my living room began to pulse. The paint seemed to bruise, turning a deep, sickly purple. The screaming started again, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices, all screaming in different keys, harmonizing into a wall of sound that vibrated the glass in my windows until it cracked. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound was inside my head. It was the sound of iron meeting bone. It was the sound of breath being stolen. "Let me out!" I screamed. The floor beneath me softened. The oak planks felt like muscle. I looked down and saw a shape moving under the wood. A hand, pressing upward, trying to break through. I retreated to the kitchen, the only room with a tile floor. Tile was cold. Tile was hard. It didn't feel like skin. I sat on the counter, clutching a steak knife, watching the doorway to the living room. The screaming had settled into a rhythmic moan. I realized it was breathing. The apartment was breathing. Every few seconds, the walls would expand by an inch and then contract. Dust motes danced in the air, but they weren't dust. They were tiny flakes of dried skin. I needed to find a way out. I looked at the vents. They were narrow, but maybe I could unscrew the grate. As I reached for the screwdriver in my junk drawer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Don't look in the closet." My blood turned to ice. My eyes drifted toward the hallway closet. I hadn't opened it since I moved in. I didn't have enough coats to fill it. I ignored the warning. Fear is a poison, but curiosity is the needle. I walked to the closet, my footsteps muffled by the fleshy floor. I grabbed the handle. It was warm. Pulled it open. There were no coats. The back of the closet was gone. In its place was a vertical shaft that descended into darkness. But it wasn't a shaft made of brick or mortar. It was a red, glistening tunnel of esophagus. It rippled with peristaltic movement. I vomited. The smell was overwhelming, the scent of a butcher shop on a hot day. "Julian!" The voice came from the tunnel. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 5 years. "Julian, come down. It's so warm here. No more bills. No more hunger. You're not her." I sobbed, backing away. The apartment reacted to my rejection. The screaming intensified, reaching a pitch that made my nose bleed. The lights flickered and died, leaving me in a pulsing, red twilight. I saw the shapes now, the residents of the walls. They weren't ghosts. They were people who had been integrated. I saw a face in the crown molding, its eyes wide and stony. I saw fingers acting as the hinges for my bathroom door. I realized then that Mr. Thorne wasn't a landlord. He was a feeder. I ran to the window. I would jump. Anything was better than being digested by a skyscraper. I picked up a heavy chair and hurled it at the glass. The chair bounced off. The window didn't even chip. Felt like hitting a trampoline. The glass was a membrane. I was trapped in the stomach of a god. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of catatonia. I watched as the walls absorbed my furniture. My sofa sank into the floor, the fabric being replaced by a dark, leathery hide. My paintings were covered by a film of translucent slime, becoming part of the skin of the room. On the third night, the door opened. Mr. Thorne stood there, silhouetted by the bright light of the hallway. He looked disappointed. "You're resisting, Julian. That makes the meat bitter. The building prefers a willing transition." "Let me go," I croaked. My throat was raw from the screaming, both the building's and my own. "You can't go," Thorne said gently. "You're the 9th floor's heart. The previous one, well, he wore out. He stopped screaming. We need the scream, Julian. It's the vibration that keeps the structure standing. Without the pain, the building collapses." He stepped inside and closed the door. This time I heard it lock, but it didn't sound like a bolt. It sounded like a jaw snapping shut. Thorne sat across from me on the floor, which was now completely soft and warm. He looked like he was presiding over a picnic. "Malachi Stone found the secret to immortality," he said. "He realized that the soul doesn't need a body. It just needs a vessel. This building is a collective of 500 souls, all working together to stay alive. You should be honored." He reached out and touched my arm. His fingers felt like cold stone. Where he touched me, my skin began to turn gray. The transition had started. "I won't do it," I whispered. I grabbed the steak knife I had hidden in my pocket and lunged at him. I didn't stab him. I stabbed the floor. The building let out a sound that shattered every light bulb in the hallway outside. A spray of hot, dark blood geeled up from the wound in the floor, soaking my clothes. The room began to thrash. It was a seizure. I was thrown against the walls, which felt like hitting a giant lung. Thorne scrambled back, his eyes wide. "What have you done? You'll kill us all." "Good," I growled. I stabbed the floor again, and again. I ran to the wall and plunged the knife into the gray paint. The wall shrieked. A thick, yellow fluid began to leak from the cut. The building began to tilt. I could hear the sounds of other apartments, the screams of the hundreds of others trapped in the masonry. They weren't screaming in pain anymore. They were screaming in hope. They wanted the end. The floor beneath Thorne opened up like a mouth. He didn't even have time to yell before he was swallowed whole, the oak planks knitting back together over his head. I felt a strange sensation in my legs. I looked down. My feet were gone. They had merged with the floor. The gray paint was climbing up my shins, turning my flesh into something hard and mineral-like. I wasn't escaping. I was winning. I realized that if I became the heart of the building, I would control the scream. I stopped stabbing. I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind. I felt the entire nervous system of the Obsidian Heights. I felt the basement, where the roots drank from the city's water lines. I felt the penthouse where the brain sat in luxury. I let out a breath, and then I screamed. But it wasn't a scream of agony. It was a command. Break. The building groaned. A massive crack appeared in the center of the living room, tearing through the muscle and the bone. I felt the structural integrity fail. We were going down. I was going to take this nightmare and bury it in the dirt. As the building began to collapse, I felt a moment of pure, beautiful silence. The voices in the walls stopped. The heartbeat stopped. I waited for the impact. I waited for the darkness. But the impact never came. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the lobby of the Obsidian Heights. The sun was shining. The marble was cold and white. Mr. Thorne was standing behind the desk, holding a fountain pen. "The rent is unusually low for a place like this," a voice said. I turned around. I saw myself, another Julian Vance, looking tired and broke, holding a portfolio of illustrations. I tried to shout. I tried to tell him to run, but no sound came out. I looked down at my hands. They were white and smooth, like polished marble. I looked at the wall behind the desk. I saw my own face carved into the stone, my mouth frozen in a silent O. I wasn't the heart. I was the lobby. The new Julian signed the contract. He took the key. I felt the vibration of his footsteps as he walked toward the elevator. It hurt. Every step he took felt like a hammer against my ribs. I realized then that the building didn't just consume your body, consumed your time. I was trapped in a loop, a permanent fixture in a lobby that would never see the light of day. The sun set. The new Julian reached the 9th floor. Upstairs, the screaming started again. And down here in the marble, I began to weep. But to the world, it just looked like condensation on the walls. If you love this story and want more contents like this, comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the channel for interesting videos.